I teach 3rd grade English and 6th and 7th grade history and English in the middle school here, and I taught 2nd grade last year. So I have a really good understanding of the English program at this school, and I've also taught in traditional public schools. So I think I can give you a good understanding of what we do here from 1st grade through 5th grade, and maybe just a little taste of 6 and 7 and 8 if we have time, so that you can see the scope. But there's a lot of components of the English program. This is kind of all of them, but not even really all of them. We have, let's say, in 1st and 2nd grade, 3 days where students have English. Once they get into 3rd grade, they have 4 days with English class. And then once they move into 5th and 6th grade, they have 4 to 5 days with English class. So you can see how it grows over time. And in the early years, especially 1st and 2nd grade, the children experience each of these components to help build their ability to read and write. So that is the first step of learning how to be an English student. And so in 1st grade, because they haven't had traditional English education in kindergarten, if they've started here, they need to have all of these different components to get the round education that provides them with the building blocks of being able to look at a text, read that text, and then also produce writing. So I'm going to go through these and kind of dig a little bit into each of them so that you can understand what we do and try to give you the big picture of how it all comes together by the time they get to 5th grade, so that by that time it's really their experience is the same as what a 5th grader in a public school or another independent school would be. So I'm going to start with the unit of inquiry because this is the big picture that the Chinese teacher and the English teacher work together to kind of create this umbrella for each unit. So the Chinese teacher and the English teacher would work together on whatever the topic is to figure out what are the essential questions that we're going to look at, what are the key concepts, what are the vocabulary that they're going to learn in both English and Chinese. And then in the English class, we would take this and we would connect it to the reading instruction, to the writing instruction, and to the vocabulary instruction. So if, let's say, I'm doing outer space, which is our current unit in 3rd grade, we have our vocabulary, we have our ideas. When we're reading texts together, we're reading nonfiction texts about outer space. So I will pull in articles for the students or stories. Sometimes they're in our textbook. Sometimes we find, articles on different websites that have newspaper articles for kids. And we use that theme to teach reading. This can happen much more organically in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade once the students know how to read. Of course, in 1st and 2nd grade, the teacher needs to take more time to teach the kids how to read. I think we're going to hold questions until the end.
Do you find that most kids entering 1st grade can read?
Mostly not, unless their parents have supplemented at home
Or parents supplementing in your experience?
No.
That's not mine.
Well, I mean, many parents do. I have a whole lot of confidence. I don't want to comment.
So, I think it's different per family, but we don't teach English reading in kindergarten here. So we come in 1st grade with the assumption that kids can't read, and we're going to start with A because that's our curriculum, or we're going to start with consonants or vowels. That actually brings up a great point, though, which is that we differentiate instruction. So that if a child comes in 1st grade and they can read, either because they have that natural aptitude and they picked it up on their own just from reading at home with parents, or they've come from a traditional preschool, they are not going to be spending the majority of their class time learning A, B, C. Of course, the teacher does have to do full class instruction to meet where the majority of the kids are, but because we have small classes, we can we can individualize, we can tailor it to the needs of that class. And then as I go into our reading program a little bit, you'll see how that differentiation really comes into play and the resources that we have in the school that allow us to differentiate. So in the early years, let's say first grade where they're first starting to emerge as readers, and then second grade where they're really just coming into their reading selves, we'll try to bring in as many unit of inquiry texts that are at the kids' reading level, but also it's like projects, it's discussion, it's group work, it's the teacher leading interesting discussions, reading to the children to give them the background information that they need to progress. And I think that that's one of the most beautiful parts about the IB curriculum is that many studies and also just kind of like common sense knowledge tell us that people need background information and a lot of knowledge to be able to understand their reading, to be able to comprehend when we read. So by exposing kids to all of these different units of inquiry and all of these different vocabulary, as they go through the grades and all these wonderful units, they're filling in, and even in Chinese when they're younger, before they start learning English, they have all this background information so that they come to their reading with understanding of this topic. So giving them that knowledge and helping them construct that knowledge for themselves is a major benefit of this unit of inquiry approach. Again, it's connected to the writing. My students just wrote wrote their own mini books about outer space. So my writing instruction can be related to the unit of inquiry. So we try and keep it as authentic as possible. If I want my students to learn nouns and verbs and how to write good sentences, we're going to write them with the vocabulary from the unit of inquiry. So we try to keep it as cohesive as possible. And that gives them a lot of opportunity to engage with the ideas in the inquiry, in the unit of inquiry, but also to practice being a reader and a writer in the ways that they need to. Some parents have asked about how the unit of inquiry relates to, phonics, decoding words, or writing, all the different genres. How can we connect that? Well, the way the IB program works is that there's key concepts that the teachers will pick to go over for each unit. So, for example, some of the concepts that we could choose from are function, causation, form, connection, perspective. Even though these aren't inherently a part of a study of astronomy or a study of across the United States, my co-teacher and I might decide this unit we're going to make sure that the students understand what causation is. What causes our feet to stick to the earth? Gravity. So we bring in the concept of causation. And then when I'm reading my students a story about Abraham Lincoln before President's Day, I bring in the idea of causation. It has nothing to do with astronomy, but this concept is woven into the curriculum. So when we're reading about Abraham Lincoln, which I can't tie to astronomy, but I want to feel connected and relevant to what we're doing in the unit of inquiry, I say, look at what the death of his mother has caused his life to be like, and what has that caused our country to be like? How has that affected it? And so we take the idea of cause and effect, and we can relate it across our different things that we're studying. So it's really nice. The same with connection. We might say in the Across the United States unit, what's the connection between the North and the South in the country? We talk about this term connection. Now when I'm teaching reading workshop another day in the week, I bring up connection again. Let's make connections about characters. So we can't always make everything work across the different pieces of the English curriculum because there's so much that we need to teach, but we can bring in these concepts to everything that we do. I think perspective is another great idea. We can look at whose perspective is this article coming from when we read an article about someone we're studying the biography unit. Who's telling the story about Helen Keller? Who is the perspective coming from? And then we can write personal narratives, and the students can have a chance to express their own perspective about something. So that's another really nice part of this IB curriculum, is the idea of the key concepts. Now, all through in first through fifth and continuing into the middle school, the teachers will use some variation of a reader's workshop. And this is what you would see in most of the public schools around this area, where students have their reading assessed, so the teachers figure out what their reading level is, where they are, and then would give them books for their level. So if your child does come into first grade knowing how to read, he or she would have a book basket with books that are appropriate for him or her. So if they can read a chapter book in first grade, those chapter books are going to be in their book basket, or going to be assigned by their teacher, so that they can make a book out of the experience. And during reading workshop, different reading strategies would be taught that kids, no matter what level they're at, could apply to their reading. If I'm teaching prediction and I'm explaining to kids how to make predictions while they read, to keep them engaged in their reading, to keep them alert while they're reading, whether I have a student who's reading at level C, a very simple story, or level L or M, they can then take that idea, take that practice into their work and make predictions where they are. In the early grades, read-alouds in English are a very important aspect of teaching reading. So the teachers model what spoken English sounds like and what narrative sounds like, because getting that voice in their heads, that this is the rhythm of the narrative, is very important for them to understand how to read and to take that voice that we create for them into their own reading. So you will definitely hear from your child, "My teacher read out loud to me today." As they grow up and get further into the grades, we read out loud to them a lot less, although studies show that even reading to middle school kids is very beneficial for them. Because again, the vocabulary that they take in when they're being read aloud to is just wonderful, and it gives the opportunity for these class discussions and for ideas to emerge. And then we would have reading conferences with the students. So while students are taking time to read their individual books at their seats, the teacher is circulating and having the student read out loud to assess where they are, to understand, are they in the right book? Is this book too easy? Is this book too hard? Are they really getting the most out of this book and out of these lessons? And so we would read together, and the teacher would ask questions, and if necessary, say, you know what, this book isn't really working out for you. This is not the best book for you. Let's switch you out. And so that's a very important part of reading. Now, the reading workshop is not always connected to the unit of inquiry, because we don't have 50 books to choose from. Not that the school doesn't have it, but to find 50 books about outer space that the kids are going to read. So these are all different kinds of books. This year we brought in a wonderful series from Scholastic called Branches, and it's pictures, and they're chapter books with pictures, and they're all different levels, and they're really engaging to the kids, so a lot of the kids would have those. And then we pull other chapter books, fiction and nonfiction, because nonfiction reading is so important these days, and is really what the public schools are focusing on a lot more. So we have a variety of those types of texts, again, at the student's level. And the counterpart to that is writing workshop. And this is another thing that is what basically writing instruction is called these days. So in the early grades, kids are really just learning how to write words, right? And that could take the form of kids drawing pictures of the story that's in their mind if they're doing stories, and then captioning that and saying like mom, because they're just learning how to spell mom, dad, car, with little arrows pointing, and this is the first iteration of learning how to write. And then they take that and it grows and it evolves. So by the end of first grade, they're writing sentences. Through second grade, they're perfecting that. They're getting onto longer sentences. They're writing stories. And by third grade, we're working on focused paragraphs. My students right now, topic sentences, 3 details, concluding sentence, using evidence from the text. And so you can see how in that short amount of time, from first grade, where they're just learning how to print and sound out mom and dad and make and take, by third grade, they're writing these very focused paragraphs, which become essays. And that's what they'll do more in 4th and 5th grade. They'll also write narrative texts in first and second and third grade and throughout, which are stories, either personal stories from their own life or fictional stories. And we will also do poetry, which I didn't note there, but that also helps them to get to know language, to have fun with language, to play with language, to play with the rhythm of language and the sound of language. So that's a part of the kind of duality of learning how to read and write at the same time. And we write about reading, and we read our own writing, and we read other people's writing, so it's a very dynamic approach. This is also differentiated because kids are writing at all different levels, whether they are in this school or any school. There are some kids, as when Lynn was saying, that have the aptitude for writing, and some kids who struggle with it, and we differentiate. So this model of the writing workshop and the small classes are beautiful for that because the teacher can basically conference with every kid in a period. When I was working in West Windsor, we had to have these very complex systems for meeting with kids because you have 20 or 25 kids in a class and you want to have authentic instruction with each one, but maybe you meet with them once a week or once every 2 weeks because you have so many kids. Here, usually in a class, the teacher can meet with every single student and look at their writing. So I have my students writing during class, and I look at it, and I meet with them, and I say, like, this topic sentence does not answer the question. This does not follow the model on the board. How do you revise this topic sentence? And I'm right there with them doing that because I have the time in the small class to do that. So it provides a really unique experience for the kids to meet with their teacher during every class period. And so that is something that is just impossible in bigger classes. So again, the writing conference is a really important part of the writing experience and in the differentiation process. We also teach grammar, and grammar is the rules, basically, is the rules of writing. So again, at the early grades, this is very important for students to learn where to put a capital letter, where to put punctuation, where to put the period, when do we use a question mark, when do we use an exclamation point. And we go through all of these skills, these writing skills, and we have a grammar program that we use, but again, because we can tailor it to the class, if it's too difficult or if it's too easy, we can bring in the kind of work that we feel is necessary. And we try to keep it as authentic as possible. So I always tell my students when they're writing anything, if they're writing a paragraph, that they can't show it to me until they've checked to make sure that they have their capital letters and their punctuation. And that's authentic grammar instruction. It's not, like let's just do worksheets, which we do to solidify the concepts, but it's also woven into everything we do, whether we're writing about the unit of inquiry, whether they're working on their projects, whether they're writing about their reading, we can weave it into all of that. Phonics is just a word that basically describes learning how to read and sound out words. So the teachers will often talk about phonics and forget that maybe parents don't necessarily understand, but it's learning to decode words, and that basically takes place in first and second grade when students here are learning how to read. So beginning with, the word cat and sounding out and knowing that when C is at the beginning of a word preceding a vowel, it usually makes the hard K sound. And when it's a 3-letter word, that A is going to be a short vowel, A. And then knowing what sound the T makes. So it's the very elemental ability to learn how to read and decode. And teaching students how, when they're a little bit older and a little bit more advanced, how to break a word into syllables. Because a lot of times kids will just look at these bigger words and give up or skip and go on to the next word because that word is difficult for them. So what phonics and our phonics program does is also teach syllables and how to figure out where to break the syllable. And that's part of phonics instruction. That's part of our book, Explode the Code. Yes?
I don't want to interrupt, but I just wondered if you could put this in the context of being a bilingual or trilingual child. So, for example, you know, obviously I think in a lot of our communities, people are like pushing reading and people know about this. Is there anything you've seen being an English teacher in a school where you're really trying to get people bilingual at a minimum, sometimes trilingual? Like this might be more important, or some kids are more interested in phonics, like some kids are more systematic about these rules and some kids don't need it, or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, some kids don't really need phonics because it's so easy for them to read. It's like their aptitude, and they just look at a word and they know what it is. There's some magic in that. I can't really explain where that comes from. I had that experience with my second son who just, was 5 years old and reading a book. And then, with my first son, I had the experience of him needing to learn all of those rules. I'm not sure that that's so related to the bilingual education as much as just individual kids and how their brains work. And I do think, though, that all kids can benefit from the phonics because even the ones who are amazing readers and natural readers and didn't really need to learn these rules get to a point where the words become big and they do need to sound out the words, and they then know that T-I-O-N makes the sound shun. So our program, it's sequential and it starts very simple and then,
a follow-up question, which is not related to English. Is it possible that these phonics tools somehow help a child later, like if they want to learn a second or third language? And not learning it, I was just wondering.
I would say with English more with like the Latin languages, like with French and Spanish and languages that are more that are more similar to English. I would think that those rules would be applicable and knowing where to break up the syllables. Unfortunately, I know no Chinese at all, and I can't really speak about that connection. And maybe Joy would be able to get into that later. But I do know that most kids need to learn how to sound out the words, and this gives them that opportunity. And I'll just tell you very quickly that this is a differentiated program. So if your child does come into first grade, or if they're new to the school and they come in second or third grade and they know how to read, the program comes with an assessment so we can see what book to put them in. And it's very differentiated because each student is working in their own book and working with a teacher who will give them the rules that they're encountering as they go through the book. In first and second grade, there is some full class phonics instruction because a lot of the kids need to learn what a blend is. When they come to a SC in the beginning of a word, they do need that instruction to know that those two consonants get blended together to make that flowing SK sound. There's other ones like TH or CH or SH, and that's instruction that most kids need so that they understand what they're seeing when they come to a word that begins with SH or CH. And, this might seem unconnected to the unit of inquiry because it's just the building block of learning how to read, and we need to do it because it's part of that whole progression. So in the early grades, this is a really strong component, as it would be in any school. As you move through the grades, phonics becomes a much smaller part of the curriculum, almost supplemental for some students who might still need it. But as they get older, the curriculum is much more holistic and focusing on the big picture of reading comprehension, those strategies, making predictions, making inferences, asking questions, making connections, and those are the strategies that we move into. But in the early grades, we definitely teach them how to sound out words. We also have a spelling program. It's called Spelling Connections. It's related to phonics, but phonics is about sound and how words sound and how you sound out words. Spelling is about how to write words correctly with the rules of written English. So I might encounter these two things in my phonics and in my spelling book, but I need to know when I'm sounding out the word make, how to spell it, that it has the silent E. And when I hear, so they're very connected, when I hear that long A in make, I know that there's the sneaky E or the silent E at the end that's making A say its name. And that's how we get make. And I need to know when I spell it that I need to include that E at the end. Or when I'm spelling the word shut, that I need an SH in the beginning of that word. So the Spelling Connections teaches kids those, those formations of words and has them practice it. And our Spelling Connections program is really wonderful because once you get into second grade, it's very analytical. It's doing analogies with words, it's making inferences, it's riddles. So the book uses these words to get the kids doing higher level thinking. And so when they encounter analogies on a standardized test, they're very familiar because they've done it every single week as part of their spelling. It's great if those spelling words can connect to the unit of inquiry. We can write sentences or a story using the spelling words to write about the unit of inquiry. That's something we would attempt to do as often as we can. And we use this all the way through 5th grade. So kids are learning those spelling, and it gets much harder as it goes on, but it starts very easy. So kids learn how to write, and then it builds. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges and also what's wonderful about this curriculum. The biggest challenge that the teachers and I always talk about is that there's never enough time for English. But I think every teacher feels that way in every school. But this is what our English program looks like. So in 1st grade, 20% of their week is English class. All 80% of the other 80% of their week is in Chinese. Now they need that to become Chinese speakers. So while my kids who did not go to this school had 100% of English, they don't know how to speak Chinese. So you're getting a lot in that other 80%. But it is only 20% of their week. In 2nd grade, it's 25% of their week. In 3rd grade, it's 35% of their week. And then in 4th and 5th grade, it's about 45 to 50% of their week. And then once you get into middle school, the middle school schedule looks very similar to a regular, middle school in another school, which would be, they have their Chinese class, they have English, they have history, so it's a little bit different.
Isn't it 50% in Chinese in middle school? I'm sorry.
A little less than 50. I would say probably 45%.
There's no other middle school in the area that has Chinese. Or
That's 45%.
Okay.
Not
I think we should
45%.
talk about that. Okay. For example, in middle school, to my understanding, there's no other middle school in the area that has Chinese or like even Spanish at a higher level.
That's my understanding
So
also.
if it's 45%, but we do have to watch like what is the cost of that? It's very, whatever.
Yeah, so you can see that this is what their weeks are like going throughout the grades. So they do get less English time, English contact time when they're younger. And the teachers try to make that up in as many ways as we can. And I think that because I teach 6th and 7th grade here, I have students who have gone through. And I can compare them easily to the kids who I teach in West Windsor, or taught in West Windsor, and they're very similar. Their abilities in English are very similar. So by the time that they move to the middle school or to 4th and 5th grade, the idea is that they have bridged that gap because of all of the other knowledge that they've been exposed to and all of the other skills that they've been exposed to. They're able to apply that and kind of slide into where they would have been if they didn't have this education. The benefits, I think, are very there are very many benefits. So I just try to keep it to as few as possible. I think I'm running out of time too. What I see with my students is their ability to make connections is amazing because they're constantly making connections. In order to be a student here and to learn 2 languages, you have to be able to make connections. The most obvious example is when I was teaching a story from our anthology, our reading textbook the other day, and this story was a version of Stone Soup, and there were Chinese words in the story that I couldn't understand, and that I asked the students, like, why are there these Chinese words in the story? What does this mean? And they were so excited to tell me, that's soup, and that's stone, and that's fish. So that's a very obvious example of a connection, but they're constantly making these connections between, oh, that's what Yo Lao She taught us. Oh yeah, this connects to what we learned in Chinese yesterday. So they're able to make these amazing connections between what they're learning because their brains are just soaking up all of this information and they're so ripe to all of this. So they're able to make a lot of connections across learning. Communication, they're amazing communicators because they're being taught to communicate in another language. They're so thoughtful about what they're saying and what they're writing. They're really aware of their language abilities. More so than other kids because they're thinking through all of these connections. They're thinking through how they said it in Chinese class and now how they're expressing it in English. I think, as I said before, the IB curriculum gives them so many diverse experiences with so many different topics. It just makes me jealous every time I think about it. I'm like, I wish my kids had that unit because the units are so amazing and so interesting and there's so many. That they get each year. So they learn geography and they learn astronomy and they learn about the history of the United States and they learn about plants and they learn about biographies and that's just a few in the second and third grade. There's folk tales and there's just so much that they learn, so they gain very diverse knowledge. And I think that I could say that they construct knowledge. So they're not just receiving, they're not just like receptors, like we're teaching it to them and they're supposed to take it and just reiterate it. But we're giving them so many opportunities to really think about what they're learning, to analyze it and synthesize it and then express it in their own way and oftentimes in 2 languages. So it's empowering, it's very empowering. And then the students are so reflective. They're always, thinking about how can I do this better? How does this relate to what I learned? How is this related to something else? And they're just very introspective and reflective. So I think that this type of education lends itself to, a lot of really strong benefits. And the last thing in the last minute that I wanted to add was something that we talked about in my department, in the English department, which is the parents' role and how important it is for the parents to read to their children in English every night, and that is a part of this education that we ask from the parents to supplement the time that they don't have for English education. And we find that the kids who are reading every night with their parents and having positive experiences with English books are the ones who love to read, are the ones who are reading very strong once they come to middle school and writing really well. And so we try and help parents to find ways to read with their children every night and have that just be a very positive experience, not the reading that's their homework, but the time that the children hear what narrative sounds like and where they get that vocabulary. Lastly, I'd also like to say that we try and instill that love in the students, and that this year the third grade begs me to read, and they love reading. Like every time I walk into their classroom, when they're in between classes, they're all sitting there with their books, and they like rush up to me and they say, "Can we have a new book? Can we have a new book?" Like they're all fighting over these books, and it's just such a great experience. I think that kids here really love to learn and love to read English because of the curriculum and what we English teachers try and bring to them, the enthusiasm, the passion for the English language and curriculum. So I think that's it for English.